Since being named Attorney General in 2016, his office has made protecting Georgians his highest calling. Among his priorities, combating human trafficking takes precedence. Please welcome Georgia's 54th Attorney General, Chris Carr.
Well, good morning. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be a part of today's training. It is just critically important, and I truly appreciate the time that y'all have taken. I also want to thank Mayor Bottoms and the leadership at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport for continuing to make this issue a priority, not just in Atlanta, but around the state. And so I truly appreciate their leadership on this issue and their partnership. Absolutely, a round of applause. And I say that because human trafficking and sex trafficking, it's an all-in issue. We all have to be at the table. There is no way that any one entity or group or individual can conquer and combat and truly move the dial. We need to all be in this issue together, and we are. And so I thank the panel that we just heard too. You know, generally speaking, if Chris Hansen shows up someplace you are in the wrong place, except for today. And I cannot thank him enough, and the panelists enough, and the media here in Atlanta, and the nonprofits that are here, and the for-profits, and the law enforcement folks. And I just met a school board member from the city of Atlanta. This is what I'm talking about. This is the type of issue where we all have to be at the table, and I appreciate them being here, and I appreciate y'all being here. You're going to hear, I think, some common themes in my presentation as well, and I want to talk a little bit about what the state is doing, what our office is doing, but you're going to start to hear some common themes. And let me start with the issue of human trafficking, and Polaris is such a great partner and do such a great job in getting data and the hotline that's affiliated with them as well. But when we're talking about human trafficking, obviously, and Polaris will tell you there's 30-some different categories of human trafficking. That's forced labor and servitude, but it also includes sex trafficking. And our office is focused primarily on domestic minor sex trafficking. So what do I mean by that? Let me be crystal clear. It's about adults who are selling children for sex. And we have zero tolerance in the state of Georgia when it comes to adults who are selling children for sex, okay? So what we're focused on is that issue. And when we talk about dealing with sex trafficking, there's 4 different kind of buckets or categories of ways that we all are dealing with it, and you've heard about it from the panelists. I'm sure you've heard about it from earlier panels as well. I noticed that the art presentation, the pimp, the victim, and the buyer, it all aligns with this. One is you've got to prosecute those that are selling children for sex, and that's where you have to partner with federal, state, and local law enforcement and DAs and nonprofits to make sure that we are doing just that, to go after those that are selling children for sex. Then you've got to have restoration and rehabilitation, and we just heard a minute ago, we shouldn't be treating children as criminals. We need to be treating them as victims. And why is that? Well, because the average age of a victim of human trafficking is a 12 to 14-year-old girl. Now, it's not just girls, it's boys as well. But a 12 to 14-year-old girl, that is a 6th grader to an 8th grader. I just dropped my 8th grader off at school today. We were listening to the Phantom of the Opera soundtrack because she has an audition for the middle school musical later this afternoon. That's the type of thing an 8th grader is supposed to be doing. Playing soccer, taking math and science, and doing artwork. They're not supposed to be sold in Georgia to one of the 7,200 men that are purchasing children for sex. The other thing, let me just mention here as well, this is not just an Atlanta issue. It's not just a Georgia issue. It truly is global in scope. It truly is national in scope, but this is an issue that impacts our entire state. Now, there's a study was done by the Shapiro Group, and I just mentioned the 7,200 men, but the study says that there are 3,600 children in Georgia that are victims each year of sex trafficking. And some have questioned the number. The Shapiro Group is a very good, well-respected group. But let me give you another statistic. We've got a great partner, nonprofit partner called Georgia Cares. Georgia Cares works all across the state of Georgia. And in 2017, they helped nearly 800, this is just one organization, helped nearly 800 children from 134 out of Georgia's 159 counties. That statistic, let that sink in for a minute. That really shows the scope of what we are trying to deal with in the state of Georgia. It is not just an Atlanta issue, but we are doing things that we can work in Atlanta and statewide on this issue. So the second is restoration and rehabilitation of the children that are victims. The third is really its policy and its awareness, and I want to get to that in just 1 minute, but that's the third bucket. And then the fourth is demand, and we've heard mentioned demand a number of times on the panel. And that's where we're focused primarily. I am spearheading an effort of state attorneys general nationwide on a program called Demand and End. I'm wearing the pin today. And here in Georgia, we are partnering with our great friends at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, one of the great nonprofits that we have a partnership with, Street Grace. And so that's the Demand and End program that we're focused on here. I should also mention just a couple, as we were talking about restoration and rehabilitation. Let me also mention some of the other nonprofits that we work with, which is Wellspring Living, Youth Spark, Out of Darkness. There are so many, there are other religiously affiliated organizations, but so many great nonprofits that we work with. But again, so we're focused on Demand and End on the demand side. The prosecution and the demand side kind of going hand in hand, prosecuting those that are selling children, prosecuting those that are buying children. Let me give you two examples of recent law enforcement activity that have dealt with this issue. The first one, it goes back to March of last year. And it was an operation that occurred in the southeastern United States, federal, state, and local law enforcement, DAs, and others, called Operation Southern Impact 2. And in March of 2018, during this operation, 76 people were arrested. 13 children were rescued or identified as victims during this particular activity. And the 76 that were arrested were looking to purchase children. Those that were arrested, nearly half of them, 34, were from Georgia alone. Now remember, this was a southeastern U.S. initiative, but 34 were from Georgia. They ranged in age from 17 to 72. Some of their occupations: postal worker, nonprofit employee, small business owner, store clerk, mechanic, daycare administrator, pastor, construction worker, and a magician. Anybody, could have been your neighbor, that sort of thing. But that's what the buyers were looking like. We also know about the Super Bowl, during the Super Bowl time, and Chris Hansen mentioned, look, this is not just an issue for sporting events. And I was the former Commissioner of Economic Development. Tourism is a big deal in our state, and we should be proud of it. It's a $70 billion a year industry. Folks come to Atlanta, they come to Georgia for a number of reasons. But sporting events and conventions are two of the reasons, and those are positive, but with them can come criminal behavior. So we shouldn't stop going out and recruiting conventions and major sporting events like the Super Bowl or the Final Four or College Football National Championship, but we should stop the criminal behavior. During the Super Bowl, I know we've all heard, 169 arrested, 25 different law enforcement and DA agencies that were involved, 7 nonprofits or non-government organizations. Of those arrested, 26 were alleged to be sex traffickers themselves. 34 were allegedly attempting to engage in sex acts with minors. 9 juvenile victims rescued. 9 other victims identified. So those are 2 examples of how we're focusing both on the supply as well as on the demand side. So let me come back and let me talk about the third bucket, which is public policy and awareness. And let me talk a little bit about what the state is doing. And let me start with Governor Brian Kemp and First Lady Marty Kemp. They have made this an issue and did make it an issue prior even to coming into office. We did a great program with a number of different state agencies and the city and the Gwinnett County School Board and others called Stop Traffic. We did this event on January the 2nd. We got 72 school buses from the Gwinnett County school system to identify and to exemplify those 3,600 children that are sold each and every year. It was a great program. I wish that others around the country would do that, because it really, I think it gives you a tangible approach to and tangible evidence of kind of what we're focused on. But Governor and First Lady were there, and just recently the First Lady has announced the GRACE Commission, which stands for Georgians for Refuge, Action, Compassion, and Education. And it's going to be a commission bringing everybody together to talk about the issue of sex trafficking around the state. So I can't thank them enough for making this a priority right out of the gate as far as their administration goes. In our office, we have focused in years past. I've been Attorney General since 2016. We worked with the legislature and then Governor Deal to make sure that soliciting for the purpose of human trafficking is now a crime, as well as patronizing. So soliciting is me going out and asking. Patronizing is somebody offering and me accepting. We had to do that 2 different years, and I really appreciate the legislature's support. This year, let me tell you a couple of initiatives that are being worked on. One, from our office, we have the authority to prosecute human trafficking, and we're going to put together a human trafficking unit within our prosecutions division, and we are working with the legislature through the appropriations process right now to make sure that we have prosecutors and crime analysts and investigators and victims advocates as well, so that we can have the proper role to make sure the state can work very closely with local DAs and sheriffs and U.S. attorneys and the FBI and others, and make sure that our children are protected. There are 4 bills that are currently going through the legislature, 3 in the House that have gone to the Senate, 1 from the Senate that's gone over to the House. The first one is called the Anti-Human Trafficking Protective Response Act, which was introduced by Representative Chuck F. Strachan from Gwinnett County. A comprehensive piece of legislation that will ensure that child trafficking victims are not treated like criminals, but are given trauma-informed services that will facilitate recovery. It also gives prosecutors the ability to deal with bad actor hotels, and it criminalizes knowingly profiting from trafficking of another. There's another bill, and that was HB 234, HB 281, and I give you these numbers so that you can reach out to your elected officials and encourage them to support these bills as well. HB 281, introduced by Representative Terry Anulewicz, would focus on requiring anyone caught pimping or pandering to serve at least 72 hours in jail, and increase the penalty for a second conviction of pimping or pandering to a felony. And then Governor Kemp and his floor leaders in the Senate, Senator Brian Strickland and Blake Tillery, they introduced SB 158, the Anti-Human Trafficking Protective Response Act, which is a companion piece to the first bill that I mentioned to you in the House, would do very much the same that I mentioned before. I should also mention that Mrs. Kemp's commission will be spearheaded by Mrs. Kemp herself, First Lady Kemp, as well as GBI Director Vic Reynolds and Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones from the House. And then the fourth bill is HB 424 by Representative Deborah Silcox, and this would also make human trafficking a precursor to one of the to our gang bill, and allow human trafficking to gangs to be prosecuted for human trafficking as well. So I would mention those and encourage you to reach out to your elected officials and make sure that they know that you are supportive of this as well. So I want to finish by saying thank you again for all of y'all being here. The more eyes that we have on this situation, the better. And one of the challenges, I know some of the panelists talked about challenges. One is getting good data. about how human trafficking is impacting our community and our state. The other is the stigma of reaching out and telling somebody when something doesn't look just right. And that's the thing I would ask you as you're going through your training program today. It would be better to tell somebody in law enforcement that you think something is wrong than allow one more child to be abused and to be a victim. We need to, through this training, through other trainings, through your presence today, it needs to be crystal clear. Adults selling children for sex will not be tolerated in Atlanta or in the state of Georgia. Thank you all so much.